Almost had to preach in the dark there. Good morning, First Christian. It's great to have you all here. We have a number of people are out either traveling or apparently there's some stuff going around that's hit quite a few people. Keep them in your prayer. Today we are in the penultimate sermon in this series on death, and we're going to talk about possible pitfalls, and you'll understand what that means here in a second. We're going to be in 1 John chapter 4, starting in verse 16. If you'd like to turn there, we'll be there in just a minute. If not, the words are going to be printed on the screen behind me, so you can feel free to follow along. We talked a few weeks ago about this guy named Andrew Huberman, who is he's a neuroscientist, does a lot of study in the way that the brain works, and he was talking about freedivers. You guys remember what I was talking about that? Freedivers, and how you have something in your body that's made to induce panic in you if you get too much carbon dioxide built up, carbon monoxide, not air building up in your body. And it's basically because you need to take a breath every 3 minutes or so. You really, really need to do that. And so your body has this mechanism that's made to, when you're lacking oxygen, to induce a panic, to solve the problem immediately. But freedivers can overcome that. They can train that fear out of their body. The problem with that is that they have a tendency to die without experiencing any fear, any warning that death is upon them. And so he talked about how freedivers will be coming up from the bottom, and they'll just all of a sudden just die. They don't feel any panic. And they know that this is true because they have these people around them that are basically observing if they stop swimming, to grab them, to get them up to the surface and revive them. And they've revived these people, and they've told them that, hey, I just was swimming, and then all of a sudden I wasn't. I was just gone. Because the fear response, there's no panic, there's no nothing, there's no warning, it just comes on them, it just happens. That fear was made to protect them, and they've kind of trained them out. And so what does that have to do with our sermon today? Well, one of the things that we've been trying to get to the point of is where we're no longer being mastered by the fear of death. We're no longer under the slavery of the fear of death. But we have to understand that there's some possible pitfalls in that. And the possible pitfall is that God has given us that fear as a warning, as a protection. And so we have to understand that that fear has to be replaced by something. And we'll get into that here in just a minute. If we turn to 1 John chapter 4, starting in verse 16, there's this excellent passage that I've been profoundly interested in for decades now. And so let's go ahead and read it. 1 John chapter 4, verse 16. It says, "So we have come to know and to believe the love that God has for us. God is love. And whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. By this is love perfected with us, so that we may have confidence for the day of judgment, because as he is, so also are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. We love because he first loved us. If anyone says, 'I love God,' and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him: whoever loves God must also love his brother." In this passage, John is talking about something very, very important for us and very profound as far as the biblical narrative is concerned. This transformation that John is speaking of is a transformation that's hinted at all the way back in the Old Testament. It's implicit in the whole story of Israel and their freedom from bondage in Egypt. They're entering into the promised land. This is what God has been driving at, and that is this, that we become perfected in love. And when we're perfected in love, the necessity for fear is gone. And so we're going to look at the possible pitfalls of leaving behind the fear of death today. And we're going to look at that in a few different ways. We're going to talk about a new birth, because it's really important for us to grasp it, that you're either motivated by fear or you're motivated by love. And if you want to transition from being motivated by fear to being motivated by love, there's going to be a new birth involved in that. We're going to secondly talk about positive motivation and the benefits that that brings. And then finally, we'll talk about freedom. So hopefully this will help us today in understanding not only the possible pitfalls, but the benefits to avoiding those pitfalls and exchanging our fear of death for a love of God. So let's talk about new birth. In the biblical narrative, there's a huge emphasis placed in the narrative of Israel in their experience of going from being in bondage and slavery to having freedom. It's the background for almost everything that happens within the life of the people of Israel. It's such a profound and important cultural memory for them that they understand that at one point that they were in bondage in Egypt and they were slaves, and that they were doing all kinds of toil and not receiving any fruit from that toil, and that God came and God freed them from that. And it's important to understand that for them it was a very true and a very physical thing, but for us as Christians, it's just as important that we have the spiritual fulfillment of that promise. We're supposed to be moving from tyranny to fruitfulness. We're supposed to be moving from a life that's governed by the fear of death to a life that's positively motivated by the love of God. The problem is that for a lot of us, we live in bondage. The fear of death makes us do what is good. And it's true that that's what happens. How many of you guys have ever been to the doctor and the doctor says, hey, we need to talk about something here? The doctor said, it's really, this is important. There's a change that needs to happen in your life. Has anybody ever had that conversation with your doctor? The doctor says, hey, here's the deal. You got to change some things here. And that conversation is a very unpleasant conversation. But that conversation often yields results. That conversation, often we call it a wake-up call. Maybe you've had it in different areas of your life, but for a lot of us as we get older, it's going to the doctor or having something like that happen. But there's a wake-up call that says, hey, you are not invincible. You are not going to last forever. And unless you change some things, you're not even going to last a long time. And so you say to yourself, hey, I need to make some changes. It's positive motivation. Well, it's negative motivation, but it leads to a positive change in your life. You say, I cannot live like I have been. I cannot do the things that I've been doing. I need to change some things in my life. I need to evaluate what's going on. And the fear of death is going to bring a positive motivation. This is the way that it works. We understand this from the time that we're children, right? I mean, the thing is that as a parent, you understand that when you're training up your children, you want them to be motivated by the love of good things, but you also know that as children are children, there's a big place for fear, right? There's a big place for the understanding that if I do the wrong thing, bad things will happen. I came in this morning, it was very early, and strewn throughout our parking lot was a whole bunch of smashed pumpkins, just all over the parking lot. Somebody had a really good time. They smashed pumpkins and they spread it all around and the pumpkin seeds, and so out there sweeping it up. The great thing is that they had time, pumpkins are pretty moist inside, and then what happens is that, the air dries them out, and as they dry, they stick to the parking lot. So there were pumpkin seeds everywhere that were just stuck to the ground. It was a good time. It's always the thing you want to do first thing on Sunday morning, right, is clean that up. The thing is that can we assume that these kids, it's probably kids, probably wasn't like, retirees. These kids were out there and they were having a good time. And the thing is that they were probably also doing what? They were probably also looking around, right? Making sure nobody's going to see them, looking around, hoping that there wasn't a cop just happened to be driving by. You know what I'm saying? Like, the thing is that There was no love of what was good. These kids weren't saying to themselves, I'd like to smash these pumpkins on the ground, but Pastor is probably going to come in early and he's going to have to clean it up. And because I care so deeply about him, I wouldn't want to do this. So let's go find something positive to do. Let's pull some weeds instead. That probably never entered their mind, right? It never crossed. There was never a blip, a hint of that. If there was any constraint at all, it was, I hope we don't get caught. Well, a lot of times that's how we live. And even us as Christians and adult Christians, the problem is that a lot of times that's how we live. We say to ourselves, what can I get away with? What can I get away with? And it doesn't matter whether it's eating or whatever. How many of us say to ourselves, how healthy can I be? Instead of, what can I get away with? We look at the scale, maybe we set an upper limit on that, and we say, can I fit in like one more Cane's trip in the little room that I've got left before I hit my, I can't cross this threshold. We don't say to ourselves, how healthy can I be? How good of a thing can I put into my body? We don't sit there and we don't say to ourselves, how much exercise can I get in today? We say, how much exercise do I have to do? You guys, is this relating to? Okay. The thing is that's the way we do it. And sometimes we do that in relationships too. Like how much effort do I need to put into this before it kind of falls apart? The problem is that for most of us, we're motivated so much more than we think by what we'll call the fear of death, or motivated by the fear of negative consequences. Israel is experiencing an exodus from Egypt, and that represents an exodus from tyranny, an exodus from slavery, an exodus from fear, an exodus from being forced to do things. And it represents a new birth. You see, there's a death of the firstborn. The angel of death comes and kills all the firstborn. And the only reason that all of the Israelite firstborn aren't killed is because there's the blood of the lamb that's put over the doorposts. And it's interesting that the imagery of the Bible, doors, and especially bloody doors, and especially when you have a connection to water, and that's going to happen later on when they cross the Red Sea, all of these are images of new birth. And what we're getting at here is that the picture is clear that everybody's dying, but some people are being reborn. And they're being reborn to be led into a place where they are not going to have a tyranny that is over them. They're not going to have a tyranny that motivates them. They're going to actually be drawn into what is good, what is lovely. The problem is that transition is a difficult one. In Exodus chapter 32, verse 17 through 19, it says, when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there is the noise of war in the camp. Now Moses has been up getting the 10 Commandments. And you remember that Aaron's left to watch over the people. And they come down, what's this noise going on? In verse 18 it says, but it is not the sound of shouting for victory or the sound of the cry of defeat, but they hear the sound of singing. And in verse 19 it says, and as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. You see, the problem is this, that without the fear of tyranny over them, the Israelites are having a hard time remaining motivated by what's good. And yet, that's what's supposed to happen. The Bible says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but it's not that it's all that there is to wisdom. It's not that it's the end of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4 through 9, as Israel is getting the law for the second time, they're going to enter the promised land. It says, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. There's supposed to be a positive love of God that's replacing the tyranny that they've been under. They shouldn't have to be tyrannized into doing what's right. They shouldn't have to always have a fear of the consequences. They should be motivated by the positive love of God. Wisdom understands action and consequences. In fact, if you go to the book of Proverbs, you'll find that a lot of the book of Proverbs is about just this, that if you're wise and discerning, you'll understand that your consequences have certain actions. Or your consequences have certain... Well, that's true, I guess. But also, your actions have certain consequences. Right? You do certain things and you get a certain result, and it's interesting that Proverbs lays that out very clearly, and it's very clear on the negative aspects of that. A little sleep, a little slumber, a folding of the hands to rest. And poverty is right there with you. There's all kinds of admonitions that help us to avoid the wrong things, the consequences. But what's interesting is love motivates us and endures negative consequences. You know, see, here's the big difference between negative motivation and positive motivation. You can negatively motivate somebody until those negative consequences are no longer there. And there's even times where love will make you endure a time of negative consequences that fear would never get you through. You see, there's a limit to what fear can do for you. There's a limit to the negative motivation and the positive that it can bring. You see, the problem is that if you're motivated by negative consequences, sometimes at the beginning of an action, you have to endure some negative consequences in order to get to the good that's beyond that. And what happens is that if you've always been motivated by negative things, then you can't cross that boundary. You can't cross that threshold. Because the thing is that the avoidance of negativity has been the rule for you for your whole life. And so now all of a sudden there's some good thing, but you have to cross over some negativity. Well, that's been the boundary for you. And it's going to be hard to cross it in order to see the glory that could be had. So what's the point here? The point is this, is that throughout this sermon series, we've been working hard to remove from you the fear of death. And I hope that it's been successful. I hope that it's been helpful to you. I hope that when you look at your own death, you don't look at it with the same kind of fear or the same kind of apprehension or the same kind of questions that you had before we started the sermon series. But I'm here to warn you that if you don't replace that fear with love, then your condition will be worse off than before we started. What are the benefits of the new motivation? What are the benefits of being motivated by love instead of fear? Well, you get an escape from tyranny, and you get to enjoy the fruit of your labor. What is the enjoyment of the fruit of the labor? That's a weird thing to think about. It's set up in the Old Testament with Egypt as the fact that Israel's working and working and working, but they're working for the Egyptians. Everything that they build, all the great things that they create, they don't get to use them. They don't get to enjoy them. They don't get that. It all goes to the Egyptians. Well, there's something similar that happens from a spiritual standpoint. If we look at Galatians chapter 5, and if you go to Galatians chapter 5, it's about freedom in Christ. It's about our freedom and how we've been freed from all the things that we were held in bondage to previously. And one of those things is the fear of death. One of those things, though, and really chapter 5 explicates this very nicely, is we're free from the law. Well, the law is what? It's a thing. It's a do this and then that will happen. It's, hey, if you break this covenant or you break this command, these things are going to happen. Well, you're free from that now. So what's the end result of that? Do we just go crazy? Well, some people do. But Galatians says that's not the way that it's supposed to work. Galatians 5:16 says, "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh." You see, here's the interesting thing. The law is gone, but you're still not going to gratify the desires of the flesh. The law that said, don't gratify the desires of the flesh, that law is gone. So why wouldn't you just go and gratify the desires of the flesh? Well, because you have a different motivation now. But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other, to keep you from doing the things you want to do. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. You see, here's the thing. If you love God, the law is completely irrelevant to you. I want to say that again. If you love God, the law is completely irrelevant to you. You're not going to consult the law and say, what shall I do? You're going to love God and say, I want to express this love. And when you express the love, you're going to do the things that are already in the law. You think that Jesus, when he came down to earth, do you think that he sat there and he had his Bible open? You know, obviously they didn't have books back then. He had all the scrolls tucked in he had cargo robes. And he had them all tucked in there. And that whenever Jesus was going around, he was saying, oh my goodness, I have a prophecy to fulfill, I have a law to keep, I have all these things. And so he would get out and say, okay, I need to love people. Okay, I'm going to love you now because the law told me. No. Do you think that Jesus had to do that he had to go around and consult the rule book every time that he needed to act? No, he acted out of his love for the Father. Do you think Jesus needed to be told, hey, don't go stealing from people. Don't go lusting after people. Don't go to the casino and gamble all your money. Don't go, did he need to be told to do all? No. Why not? Because he was motivated by his love for the Father. The Spirit, some theologians talk about the Spirit being something like the motivation of love that goes between the Father and the Son. The desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh, for these are opposed to each other to keep you from doing the things you want to do. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of angers. All of your angers, we'll all have fits. Fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit, you see, here's where we're getting to the point. The fruit of the Spirit. You see, the difference between tyranny and love as motivators is you will still do the right things. I can tyrannize you into doing the right thing, or you can love your way into doing the right thing. You'll still do the right thing. The difference is one person will enjoy the fruit of that and the other one will not. What do I mean by that? The fruit, listen to this, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. And those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Let me illustrate this with an illustration that if you have kids, you're going to completely understand. If you were a kid, you're going to completely understand this illustration. If you neither have kids nor ever were a kid, you'll be lost. Okay? Otherwise, you're going to get this. Do you guys remember? Well, maybe you have to have had siblings. I should throw that in. Do you guys remember being a kid or having kids? And there was the fight that broke out. Mine. No, mine. Right now, my grandchildren have this thing where they want to be in front of the other one to watch TV. Right? You guys remember your head's blocking the TV? And so you get in front of them. Now they say your head's blocking the TV, and then you get in front of them. There was a picture that got sent to us of my 2 grandkids standing right underneath the TV trying to look up at it because they had done this little thing all the way up to the wall that the TV is mounted on. And now they're looking straight up. They can't see the TV at all, but they're not behind the other one. So imagine, put yourself back in that place that you were when you were a kid, and you said mine, and they said mine, and your parents came and said, you need to share. Do you guys remember that? You need to share. Now here's the thing. You can share and experience no fruit from the sharing. You can love your brother or your sister into sharing, and you will experience the joy of sharing. But if your parents make you share, you will share, but you will not enjoy 1 second of it. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? This is something that we all experienced as children. The outcome of sharing is not in doubt. It's going to happen. You're going to do it. You're going to be forced to do it. But one will share and go, I might have to share, but I don't have to like it. And the whole time they're fuming and stewing, and they hate the fact that they had to share. And the other person, out of love, said, I want to share with you. And now their joy is increased because they see the joy of their brother or sister whom they love being able to have something. And so the fruit of that is there. Do you see the point? We have been under the tyranny of death, because without that, we would have been terrible. We already were pretty terrible. We would have been worse. But we're called into something better. We're called into having the Spirit of God in us, to have the Spirit of the love of God in us. We want to do what's right. We want to love our brothers and sisters. We want to share. We want to see people blessed. We want to see people fruitful. We want to see the world made glorious, and we want to see God's name lifted up, and nothing brings us more joy than that. And so it's a great honor for us to do beyond what the law calls for. That's what God desires for us. That's what He's been leading us to. That's what the Israelites were supposed to be performing an example of. We are born again from enemies of God and hating what He loves to loving what He loves. We have been gone from enemies of God, loving all the things that He hates, to being children of God who are endowed with the Spirit of their Father and whose loves and hates exactly match His. We have gone from loving to glorify ourselves in the idolatry of self-worship to the enjoyment of the worship of God, where David danced before the Lord with all his might. The love of God motivates us. And we're not interested or care about styles of music or any of those kinds of things. What we are interested is expressing the love of God as joyfully as we can, and we sing a new song to Him. A song that is motivated by the love of Him. So let's talk about this positive motivation. What happens when you are positively motivated? Now, some of these are going to sound negative because I'm going to say you're going to hate some things and you're going to love some things. But this comes from the fact that you are motivated by love. That's what we're talking about here, okay? So when you're motivated by love, what happens? Well, there's something interesting that we see in Psalm 1, verse 1 and 2. It says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is on the law of the Lord, and on His law he meditates day and night." You see, when you're positively motivated by love, you're going to meditate on the things that reveal God to you. And that's, in the Old Testament, they had the law to reveal the love of God, the heart of God, the Spirit of God. That's what it did. Now we have Jesus Christ. But notice what it happens as a result of that. You're going to be convinced of the true evil of sin. When you're positively motivated by love, you don't have to be told to stay away from sin because you're convinced of the evilness of sin. You know deep down in your heart that it's evil and you don't want any part of it. See, that's the thing that's going on with this guy who is the person that the psalmist is talking about. He's not going to do any of those things. Notice these things are interesting in a number of different senses, but it says that he's not going to walk in the counsel of the wicked. He doesn't listen to their advice or their counsel because as soon as he hears it, it doesn't go along with his heart toward God. He's not going to stand in the way of sinners. He's not going to participate even not actively in sin, nor is he going to sit in the seat of a scoffer. The idea of making fun of God is so far beyond him that it would never even occur to him to do so. He doesn't have to be told not to do this. His heart just is repelled by the idea. By the fruit you know the tree, and he knows the tree as soon as he sees it. You see, what happens is when you're positively motivated, you also know the misery of sin. Now again, this seems like a negative motivation, but I assure you, this comes from the love of God. You understand from your own experience. You see, it's not a theoretical thing. You don't go look at sin and go, well, I can deduce if I carry the 1 and divide by 5 and look at the rotation of the earth that sin is bad. That's not, you don't come to it mathematically like that. You know from your own experience the misery of sin. And this is so important because when you know the misery of sin, not only are you motivated to not sin, but you're motivated with a heart to the people who are in sin. You're not convinced by their carrying on that they are having a great time and enjoying every minute of it. You know. You've been there. You know the misery of sin. You know the sadness of being without Christ. You know the hopelessness of not having the future that He provides. You know the difference between the simple and the foolish, those who are so far into their sin but they can't see anything else, and those who just don't know how to get out of it. You see that you have had in your own life the disease of sin. And you know its every effect, and you hate it all the more for this personal knowledge. You know your own insufficiency. Now, here's the danger of knowing your own insufficiency. It will either create in you a great love of God or a great hatred to God. When you're a kid, you have this idea that the world is easy and things are easy. When you're a kid, you paint a quick picture. You don't try very hard. You haven't studied art. You haven't sat under the masters. You haven't trained your hand. You haven't done any of that. You just scribble out a picture and you hand it to your mom or dad and they say, "Oh, this is so great." And they put it up on the refrigerator. And you think, "Man, isn't life easy? I can create beautiful art just by throwing something down." And then you get older. And you start to realize that life isn't that easy and you're not that good at things. And you start to realize your insufficiency and the fact that there was a big fig leaf over your life, over your eyes. You didn't see the true depth of your insufficiency. And then when this knowledge comes to you, it either turns you toward the glory of Christ or it makes you hate God for not creating you to be God. And when you love God, every revelation of your insufficiency causes you to love Him more. Because you are so convinced of His love for you that His sufficiency and His glory becomes something that you truly love. You turn from the idolatry of self to the love of God's greatness. You're convinced and you're joyful by the all-sufficient glory of God. And you're happy to be made a being that can enjoy Him. How great it is to be made a being that can enjoy the glory of God. How great it is. Have you ever seen cows get born? I mean, you don't have to be there personally, but you've seen it on TV, like cows get born. I think cows are great, man. I just think that they're awesome. I think that they're cute. I think that they're interesting. I think that there seems like there's stuff going on in their mind, but you don't know. But you also realize there's not stuff going on in their mind, and yet it's still great. And the thing is that when a little cow gets born, it's so funny to me. A little cow gets born, and they're all wobbly and stuff at first, but the minute they're not wobbly, you know what they start doing? They start kind of like tearing around and like jumping and doing that stuff. And you're like, dude, you're a cow. You're not made for like vertical jumps. You're a ground pounder, man. You're not, but they have the ability, and they're just like reveling in it. Look what I can do, right? They're just reveling in being a cow. And I think they have no concept of the glory of God. And yet here we are as human beings, and we were made with such a just astronomically huge privilege of not only being able to jump and run and do all those things. I mean, not me personally, but other people. To be able to run and jump and do all those kinds of great things. But beyond that, that's reveling in ourselves and who God has made us. But we, out of all the creatures on the earth, can look at God, the God of the universe, who has made all of this. We can see the principles of physics behind these things. We can see the mathematical laws that govern the universe. We can start to understand the mind that created them. We can revel in the glory of God. How great is that? Nothing else can do that, and we get to do that. You would think that the thing that we would want to do more than anything else is to worship God and glorify Him. You would think that just as the young cow wants to jump, even though his vertical is like this big, that we would say to ourselves, what better thing could I spend any of my time doing than to worship God and to glorify Him? I don't need fear to motivate me anymore. I've got the love of God. I can see His glory. I can understand His love for me. And I have something to motivate me that fear cannot touch. And it allows me to enjoy every aspect of the life that God has created for me. It allows me to enjoy every aspect of God's character and nature. Can we be convinced and joyful of the all-sufficient glory of God? Can we be happy to be made a being that can enjoy Him? Can we see the sacrifice of Christ and not only glory in it, not only be stupefied by the wonder of it, not only be overwhelmed by the love that motivates it, can we not be glad that we were not called on to make it? I don't need to be God. I don't want to be God. I get to enjoy His glory and His goodness without having to make that sacrifice. Can we be overjoyed at the endless fellowship with Him? And can we say that we can think of nothing worse than being told, I never knew you, depart from me? Man, as brothers and sisters in Christ, I hope that we can be free from the fear of death and exchange it by being motivated by the all-surpassing greatness of God and our love for Him. And it's not because we're so great that we love God. It's because we've had our eyes open to seeing the love of God for us. And all we're doing is responding to that. We know when we're motivated by the love of God, we know that the gift without the giver is useless. And that to take joy in sin is to enjoy the gift without the giver. But we know that soon there will be no joy in any of it unless we have the giver. Oh, we're over time. We're out of time. Can we have a couple minutes? Is that okay? Let's talk about freedom very quickly. We're going to know the joy of our inheritance. And the wicked will know the size of their loss. And our joys will be more and more directly linked to Christ and who He is and what He's done for us. In John chapter 17, verse 22 and 23, it says, the glory that you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one even as we are one. I in them and you in me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them even as you loved me. Father, I desire that they also, whom you have given me, may be with me where I am, to see my glory that you have given me because you loved me before the foundation of the world. Jesus is talking about us being drawn into the relationship of love and glory that he has with the Father. And if you get drawn into that relationship, you have perfect freedom and you do not need to fear death. So what things do we need to believe and belong and become? We need to believe in the glory of Christ and in his great love for us. We need to belong to him in a covenant of love. And when we belong to him in a covenant of love, we become led by the Spirit. And when we become led by the Spirit, we have no need of the fear of death. We share in this loving relationship of glory that exists between the Father and the Son. We are drawn into it, we are a part of it, and we enjoy it. We get the fruit of that glory. But we must be released from the fear of death to pursue this. Let me say that again. We must be released from the fear of death to pursue this. You're either motivated by the fear of death or you're motivated by the love of God. And so that's why we took the risk of having this sermon series and of talking about this freedom from this fear of death. Because without being freed from it, you cannot have what God has desired for you since the beginning of time.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page, where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out our past lessons and videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to his church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week.